everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Main Gains podcast. With me is our second guest, who is not Zoe or myself, and that is Stan Skofield, owner of Skofield Performance. Stan, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really excited to be part of this.
I know. So Stan and I kind of connected probably at the beginning of the school year. We met for the first time, knew each other online from our online presence, but it's been a good relationship so far.
It's so funny how that relationship even starts, right? So it's just like, oh, I kind of like what you're doing on Instagram and social media, and then vice versa, and then you kind of like, oh, that's awesome. Because I can remember sending you messages like, oh, love that exercise, I'm stealing it, it's now mine, right?
I know, like watching the stories and being like, love that.
Right, and it's and it's funny in this profession, like you see sometimes like professionals in strength and conditioning, sports performance, that can be so adversarial versus like, oh man, I like what you're doing, that's pretty cool, and then try to like, hey, keep doing it, you know, and try to feed off each other and kind of collaborate more versus, hence how we got here.
Yeah.
Right? Then rather being like competitive or anything like that, it's like when you actually start doing those things, like great things happen for both parties,
Right, it's like the collaborate versus compete thing. And I think it helps that we're far enough away from each other that we're not kind of fighting for the same like athletic population. But even if we were, like, we both have our different niches, so like it works that we can both benefit from each other. Right,
no, absolutely. And it's that definitely helps, but and I always say it's like you can always learn from somebody, right? In terms of like all the different, you're just seeing new things, or like I'm always looking at your social media. I'm like, oh, she does such a better job with that. It's great. It's great to see.
So Stan, tell everyone kind of your background. Like, how did you get into training and like becoming a coach?
Oh, so now we're going way back. So my background. So I'm an athletic trainer and a strength and conditioning coach. So how I came to do it, I'm from Scarborough, Maine. Went to University of Maine for springboard diving. I was a Division I athlete, and after a couple of years, I just got kind of burnt out, And I said, you know what, I'm going in the military, and it was just something I always wanted to do, kind of serve my country. I wasn't completely sure of like what I wanted to study in college. Until like my last semester at UMaine, I kind of learned about this athletic training thing, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. But at that point, I just wanted to kind of, I'd always been in Maine and wanted to kind of see a different part of the country. And so joined the Navy, did that, was a search and rescue swimmer. So what you do there, like helicopter, airplane kind of goes down, like I'm the guy that goes and gets them, right? Along with some other duties. But while I was there, I always knew in the back of my head, I wanted to kind of get into this athletic training thing. So I knew the Navy wasn't going to be a career for me. And when I got out, I immediately enrolled at the University of Southern Maine. They actually didn't have an athletic training program back then. So back then it was a self-design major. So what I did was find a local university like a Plymouth State or something like that had a program, and I kind of like copied what they had and had to get permission from like all the different departments to be able to go through this. And the actual head athletic trainer had several other students that were kind of doing the same thing. So that's how I kind of got interested in the whole athletic training side of things. So I was able to kind of, back then you had to do 1,500 hours of athletic training, like, kind of with supervised, but like mentorship. Back then it was pretty good because like I could go cover a soccer game and with no one but me, right? And you want to learn about like how do you make some big decisions like, that are affecting whether it's not necessarily life-threatening, but some pretty significant injuries, that's where you really start to learn it versus having somebody right there over your shoulder where you're just kind of observing. So I really valued that experience, and I think there could be a balance between doing that and how athletic training is done today at a school where I don't think they get that level of experience, and it kind of hurts them a little bit coming out. But I won't go too far down that soapbox, right? So anyway, got the athletic training thing. My passion was always being like in baseball, and I knew that when I got it, my dream was to work for the Boston Red Sox. So I kind of lined myself up. I made sure I worked for USM Baseball, which had a great program. I worked in the Cape Cod League, which is like the premier collegiate baseball league if you're going to get drafted. And at games, I'd go talk to scouts to find out like who do I apply to for jobs. And luckily, I was a December graduate at the university, and my first job I applied for was with the Boston Red Sox, and I got it, which was like okay, mission accomplished. And there, I kind of quickly learned the value of like injury prevention, right? Like when somebody gets hurt, regardless of what happens, like if you get a pitcher and his arm's sore, he could have the worst mechanics in the world, but it was always the trainer's fault, right? So I quickly learned like the value of like, hey, get these guys in shape and get them doing exercise and getting them strong, and I developed a passion for it and realized like, hey, your injury prevention program is your strength and conditioning program. And back then, like, it was really, like, strength and conditioning in baseball, like, that was like, no. Yeah.
What year was this?
That was 1996. 96, 97.
Fun fact, that's the year I was born.
What? Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. So meanwhile, while you were one, this is what I was doing. But anyway, so I really, at that same time period, learned the value of strength conditioning. I had a really good mentor in BJ Baker back then, who was the head strength coach for the Red Sox, their first one. And really, started to kind of go down that road of, strength conditioning, learning more about it. That was back when like Exos was the IMG Academy. Mark Verstegen was just in his infancy of sports performance. I'd go up and visit him. So I was kind of passionate about learning all I could from that, as well as kind of developing my rehab and my, the other sides of my athletic training skills. So anyway, that's kind of how I started to get into the athletic training, strength conditioning side, and how we really dove into
Were you still at the Red Sox while you were kind of like doing this?
Yeah.
So you were like starting to implement more strength and conditioning with these pro guys?
Yeah, so what was going on back then, again, like I said, strength conditioning was a new thing, and myself and Chris Karenny, who was the head minor league trainer, what we started doing was telling guys like, hey, if you want to, the front office would tell us like, hey, we just drafted this guy and this guy and this guy. This guy needs to put on 10 pounds. And we actually started kind of meeting with the guys, be like, hey, if you need to put on 10 pounds, here's a program, do this, come check in with me. We eventually moved that to where we started doing off-season workouts down there. So I moved down to Florida, and we would, every day, we'd have guys that kind of came in. And at first, it was only like 10 to 20 guys the first year, and we'd work them out all season, all the off seasons, so from like October through the beginning of February. And that grew to, by the time I left, we had like 60 guys.
That's incredible.
And we were one of the first organizations to to do that sort of thing. And the reason why we did it is because we noticed a drastic drop in injuries. And in professional baseball, it's, if a guy gets hurt, that's workers' compensation, right? And so you're paying them. So that amount financially, that adds up. Yeah. And we're able to show like, hey, here's a drastic reduction in your workers' compensation costs. So like, again, that's how it kind of began to kind of get the idea of like sports performance and kind of how you run it. And I eventually left the Boston Red Sox because, believe it or not, back then it was a ton of work, right? So any of you folks that are interested in like working in professional sports, let me give you just a brief idea of like what it's like. And I loved it, but keep this in mind. So it's a 70 to 90 hour work week, right? Like from February to the beginning of September, I had 5 days off, right? And even my off days, I was typically working because that's, of course, like they would schedule somebody. If somebody needed to move from one team to another, if somebody needed to go to the doctor, like I'm still bringing them, right? So you're working 7 days a week. Typical day for me, I would work, if I was on the road, I'd start my day at like 9 a.m. by bringing guys to the gym and finish it probably sometimes at midnight, 1 o'clock, helping the clubby with laundry. So, and then at home, it was usually, I'd probably roll in the office around 10, work till about 11 at night. So a lot of long hours. And you do that over and over again. Now, here's the fun question I always like to ask. So, given how much volume of work that is, what do you think my starting salary was my first year?
Ooh, let's see. Honestly, I'm probably gonna say like, I don't know, maybe 40,000.
40,000, right? Which sounds like a reasonable salary.
But not for that amount of work that you're putting into it.
Right. So here's how much I got paid. $16,000 and health insurance. And I'd get some cash, when we went on the road, that sort of thing, for meal money. So maybe all told, like maybe $20,000.
Yeah.
That, when I left, my salary was $20,000. And, plus that cash you get for going on the road, that sort of thing, for meal money.
Right.
So where the real money is in that is like, if you can survive that, right, as you move up, where the real money is at is like once you get into the major leagues, right, and then you get a better salary. Plus, if your team makes the playoffs, like you're typically going to get a bonus of like $20,000 for the first round. The second round is probably somewhere around 60. You make it to the American League Championship, it was like, anywhere from 100 to 150,000. You win the whole thing, it's like 250 to 300. That's why you stay in it.
Yeah.
But you got to pay your dues to get there.
Yeah, those are big ifs.
Yeah. And it's changed now. I think obviously the salaries had to come up. But that was my whole thing. I'm like, when I used to argue with the front office, I'm like, listen, I just want to get paid more. I don't want to leave. I just want to get paid more. Like, I want to take a competitive salary somewhere else. But I'd love to stay here. And look at all the money I'm saving you in workers' comp. But the problem is you guys don't pay good quality people, so then you leave and then you get these mediocre people that stay in.
Yeah.
And, back then they didn't understand that. They've come around where they started to hire a lot more quality people, better educated, provide more education to them, provide more support to them. I did have an intern throughout the season, which helped out. So that was kind of like the downside to it, right? But the value and the experience I got out of that in terms of time management and how to just like manage people, manage athletes, different approaches to kind of coaching and athletic training, like how you go to approach somebody that is an 8-year vet is vastly different from the 16-year-old Dominican, right? Or the 18-year-old fresh out of high school who's full of themselves, that, has been the man, all through high school, all-star and everything, and they're not used to work, right? Like, how do you get through to them? Like, hey, you're now in a man's world, and it's really cutthroat, and you could be gone in 3 years. So you begin to learn about, like, different approaches, because the military style, it doesn't work.
No, it does not.
Right?
I also had to learn that one the hard way.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the long-winded story of kind of how I came into like the athletic training and strength and conditioning kind of field.
So after the Red Sox, when did you come back up to Saco?
So what I did from there is, my wife and I, we lived in Florida. Both decided like I'd way rather be cold than hot, right? Because July down in Florida, for any of you kids that are interested in kind of moving to Florida full time, let me tell you, it is so hot. And then you're exercising, running, like I always joke people, like I would have to bring this whole team of guys out on the field at 2 p.m. when it's 95 and 100% humidity and be like, okay, time to warm up, right?
They're like, we're warm.
Yeah. So anyway, I decided to leave the Red Sox and I took a job with a physical therapy organization working as a high school athletic trainer. Let me back up for a minute. At the same time I was doing the Red Sox, for the first couple of years in the off season, I came back and worked at USM as the assistant trainer there and their first strength coach there. So I was doing those duties and then leave in February to go work for the Red Sox. And the reason I bring that up, the value point, is something like you probably know and have understood in the beginning of it. It's like, if you're really passionate about this field, like, you don't just get out of school and all of a sudden start making a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right? Like, believe it or not, you might have to work 2 jobs.
Yep.
to make ends meet until you're able to kind of build yourself up, because it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a point I make to a lot of like new coaches is like, it's okay, like find a place you really like working, and even if you need to make ends meet, go find another job. Because I worked 2 jobs for years until we were able to kind of make ends meet. So anyway, ended up, when I was getting ready to leave the Red Sox, I ended up looking around for an organization where I could do physical therapy and the athletic training thing. So I worked at a high school, worked in physical therapy. And working in physical therapy is one of the best things for my career. I thought I knew something about rehab, but you just learn those guys know so much in terms of fine-tuning your assessment skills, progressions, regressions, lateralizations. Again, different population. It was really interesting. You go from dealing with an elite set of athletes, right, to general population rehabilitation, to Class D athletic sports, right?
Yeah.
So completely different population. And again, it's a big adjustment.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I started to think, what is that? How was the transition going from pros to now, especially now, dealing with the kind of high school and college being the primarily clientele that you work with?
Believe it or not, I'd work with high school kids any day of the week over pros. I really would, because there's so much, you see it, right? Like, there's so much you can impact beyond just the weight room.
Yes.
In terms of life lessons. And that's probably what helps give you value in what you're doing. Right? So that's, for me, I just, people don't believe it. I'm like, hey, honestly, I would. I do have some pro guys I work with, and I enjoy working with them. But being able to kind of work with a middle school, high school athlete, like, so much fun,
Yeah. And, I think it's funny, too, working with the high schoolers, because you end up meeting these adults who are like, wow, you're kind of not a nice person. And so when you work with high schoolers, it's like, I'm going to make you be a nice person. That way, when you're an adult, someone doesn't say that about you.
Right. And not only that, but you can have an impact on, what their decision making for what they might want to do for a career.
Yeah. And, my biggest thing, especially with high schoolers, is, I want to give them options and show them that they have options. So even if they don't go into a sport in college, or they want to play pros in the next level that they can, it's just you can do whatever you want, and the foundations we're building here are going to help you in whatever you choose to do.
Right. And so just being able to kind of give them those lessons, which is stuff they don't necessarily get in the classroom, right, is so valuable, right? You can have an impact on their down the line, them developing as a person. Right? So anyway, I came back to Maine, started working in high school, physical therapy, worked there for a long time. And on the side, I actually kind of trained people on the side. I had this business called Maximum Performance. I had no idea what I was doing from a business side of things, because again, back then it was still so new, right? From the business side, it was difficult. I knew what I was doing with training, but I didn't know what I was doing from a business sense.
And there wasn't as many avenues to learn about anything, but especially business at that point. Right now, you can just do a quick Google search, and you have everything at your fingertips about learning how to run a business. But even me, it's just almost now it's too much.
Right.
Back then, you had nothing.
I mean, there was a handful of people around, right? You had Mark Verstegen doing it at the IMG Academy, and they're charging $1,500, every week, right? To the Mike Boyles, right? When he was just getting first started, but he's still working for the college, right? And doing a few things on the side. So there was no one, like I said, that I knew of, right? And the internet wasn't a thing back then, right? There was no Google search and emailing, stuff like that, where you could kind of go look this stuff up. The advent of the internet has been huge as it relates to kind of continuing education and learning and getting ideas. Back then, you always had to go to conferences, and I'd always seek out these, whoever was kind of doing stuff in strength and conditioning. So eventually, kind of working for this orthopedic group and working in physical therapy, I got a pretty good name because I'm pretty good with baseball and pitching mechanics. I became kind of the go-to guy to see if your shoulder or elbow hurt, not just from the rehabilitation sense, but also I could take a look at your mechanics and say, hey, this is why you're putting tension in these areas right here. And so doing some stuff on the side and eventually kind of convince them that, we need to start a sports performance center.
Right.
And that's how they kind of came up with the idea of like having everything under one roof, just like a college. So having sports performance, an orthopedic clinic, and a physical therapy clinic. So everything is covered as it relates to kind of, if you're a family and your son or daughter needs to get healthy or needs to see a doctor or, needs a better way to kind of prevent injuries from happening. And the secondary benefit is you're going to learn how to run faster. So that's kind of how we kind of transitioned to, getting back up here in Saco, Maine.
Right, and then fast forward 14 years ago, I think you said, you moved into this gym right here.
Yeah, so we came up with the concept of building a sports performance facility. And again, I knew what I was doing for training, but I needed kind of help of like, well, if somebody inquires about training, how do I get them to call a front desk, and the front desk says exactly what we need them to say, and then get them in for an evaluation, and then begin to train them. And how do I get from a logistics standpoint? How do you make that happen from a sales standpoint? So I knew from a business side I needed help, and through going to conferences, I had met this guy Martin Rooney, who at the time worked for the Parisi Speed School, and the Parisi Speed School was owned by Bill Parisi, was like one of the first kind of franchises, besides Mike Boyle, that was out there for sports performance. And we hit it off, and I really liked their model and their messaging, in terms of like empowering kids, empowering athletes. And so we decided to kind of become a franchise of them. So we had the Sports Performance Center, and we started with their model. And as we began to kind of work through their model back then was all kind of movement. It was speed, agility training from 7 years old on up. But the strength part of it wasn't where it needed to be. So we started kind of refining that model, and actually we added a lot to as it relates to kind of programming to the organization. And back then, I mean, our first like 7, 8, well, more like years 3 through like 9, we were one of the leaders. Like we were always in the top 3 as it relates to kind of revenue and what we were doing, and as well as like programming. In addition to like just the training aspect, we hold like CEU events here, have speakers coming from all over, as well as like different camps. I mean, it was a very robust, great time in here, as well as like inside our whole facility. There was a big hockey facility that we trained the Junior Pirates. I think we trained 15 teams of theirs in addition to our own clients. So it was it was a great model as it relates to kind of training and putting it out, to an area that like didn't have anything in strength and conditioning. And back then, again, there was no, that wasn't a thing. Like strength and conditioning, like you're either fast or you're not, right? Strength training for girls,
God forbid.
Right. No. So helping kind of break down some of those barriers. And I had some fantastic people that worked for me and developed over the years, and it really helped. Again, it's me here talking, but I'm not here without those people and what they did and how they shaped things and the great minds that kind of came about in their work ethic and what they did. It's really a function of them as much as it is kind of me and what it turned into.
Right. So what is, like, let's start talking about kind of training the high school athlete, because hopefully some of my athletes and other athletes listen to this. And so what are some things that you kind of recommend that high schoolers do now if they want to kind of take control of their game, like in any sense of the way, like they want to get faster, stronger, or they just need to get better in general?
I think number one is, first and foremost, right, like start strength training, right? Learn it at an early age, because it sets you apart from everybody else, hands down, especially females, right? Hands down, you know this, right? And you preach it. It's like that female that goes out and starts strength training, what it does, not just to you physically, you'll begin to kind of stand out amongst your peers. But what it does for you up here, from a self-confidence point of view, immeasurable.
I've seen so much growth, like numbers in the gym, yeah, but just the confidence on the field or whatever sport they're playing, they have more of a demanding presence after they start training because they're like not worried that someone's going to push them over. They're like, I know I can handle myself.
Right. You know, and if you're a competitive athlete, like, again, I always go down the road of like, you should be strength training, right? So like my big thing is, if you're out there, if you're a competitive athlete and you're playing showcase sports, albeit like hockey, soccer, lacrosse, baseball, softball, you know, like if your family is paying the money, you know, the $2, $3, $4, $5,000 just for the tuition costs. We're not even talking in the travel costs that when you have to go, you know, get hotel rooms, eat on the road, time off for vacation. My point is like, you're competing, your goal is to stand out amongst your peers and amongst your competitors. But if you're, you know, a male, 5'8" to 5'10", 140 to 160 pounds, like that's a dime a dozen, you know, in the state of Maine. Any coach can find that anywhere. Like, look who really stands out, right? It's that physical kid, male or female, that like, hey, you know what? Lean, muscular, strong, fast, agile, confident athlete. That's who begins to kind of stand out in the field. That's what you're looking for. Otherwise, like, what are you really showcasing, right? And so that's my big thing. Like, number one, like, start strength training. Whether it's with you, whether it's with me. I mean, you should learn formalized instruction, or whether you just go to the weight room on your own and find like somebody off the internet to emulate. Like just start.
Yeah.
You know, as I always say, like, but if you want to start, you want to get on the fast track. It's like going to you and me is like going to Florida with a GPS, right? You're going to find the fastest way to get you where you need to be versus like.
And the safest.
And the safest. Great point. You know, versus like, you can get there with a map, right? That's kind of like following an internet program, you know. Or you can just go blindly, right? Just go in the gym and do something willy-nilly,
yeah.
Right? But starting strength training is probably number one. Number two, as we kind of talked about earlier, is like nutrition. Like what we preach here, I don't ask you to kind of dial in and eat uber clean and super clean, but what I do ask you is like, hey, let's start cleaning up some of your habits, right? Like if you eat cereal for breakfast, like waste of time. We need protein in there. We need good quality carbohydrate and fat to kind of start our day. So even if it's something as simple as like oatmeal, right? Yogurt with some fruit, you know, something simple. Eggs, obviously. Eggs, my big thing is like, you know, bagel sandwich if you need to get it done fast, or even a shake, right? Like you have to eat breakfast. And for those of you out there that say,
I'm not hungry.
Yeah, I'm not hungry when I'm eating in the morning. It makes my stomach upset. You know why? It's because you don't eat breakfast. Start eating breakfast, all of a sudden you're going to get hungry. And lo and behold, you're going to start putting on some good quality weight. You're going to start putting on some good quality muscle. And then develop strategies about how you're going to fuel yourself throughout the day, right? So for us, it's, breakfast, lunch, dinner, shake after you work out, and a couple snacks in between. And that can be super, super simple.
I heard a saying, I don't remember from who, but it was 3 before 3 and 5 before 9. So 3 meals before 3 p.m. and then 5 meals before 9 p.m. And meals and or snacks, right? So you have breakfast, lunch, and a snack before you work out. That's all before 3 o'clock. Then you either have like a post-workout snack and then dinner, or dinner and dessert. Like, boom, there you go.
Right. Yeah. Dude, I love that.
Yeah.
I gotta remember that. That's great. So it's nutrition is the biggie. Again, it's not about like eating super clean. It doesn't mean like I want you to eat pizza and burgers all the time, right? But at the same time, hey, let's start getting in at least 5 good quality, you know, meals throughout the day, and start with that. And start seeing what that does for your performance, and that what it does for your gains in the weight room. That right there, those two things are probably our biggest messaging. You know?
And we kind of talked about it earlier when we first got in here, but it's just like whenever I'm having these conversations with these kids and they start to kind of complain a little, and it just goes back to, do you want this or not? and how bad do you want it. Because the kid who wants to go D1 wants it bad enough to do this. The kid who wants to go D3, which there's nothing wrong with D3, I play D3,
Right.
they want it, and maybe they do all the things and they just don't have the skill, or they have the skill, this is the worst part, they have the skill, but they don't put in the work to get them to another level. That's where you don't want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there was a great article that came out. Like, did you see that article? It was in the paper. It was probably almost a year ago. They just kind of talked about, interviewed these different athletes that were Division I athletes, and it's talking about like, hey, it's not all that it's cracked up to be sometimes. You know,
It's tough.
like it is like it's a lifestyle. So if you want to go D1, but you're not in the weight room yet, like you're behind.
Yeah.
Like your talent is getting you somewhere, but your body's not going to keep you there. Because if you don't strength train now, I promise you, like you're going to be strength training at that level. And why not like get ahead of it?
That's a huge thing I tell them. It's just like if you're going to play in college, they have a strength training program. You're gonna have to do it whether you like it or not. So
Right.
why not start now and like have that leg up? That way, when you go in freshman year, the coach is pleasantly surprised that you actually know how to do these exercises.
Right. And even if and the other thing about it too is like you have an understanding of what you're doing. So if you go to a college, because not all colleges have a strength coach.
Right.
Not all colleges have a good strength coach. Right? Like you'll have an understanding of training and what you're doing and how to do it. Like, and it takes that level of stress off of you. Right? So you think of all the stresses that you come into. Just Division I, like the stresses that you've got coming into, like in addition to like, oh, I'm starting a brand new university. I've got to make new friends. I got brand new teammates. I've got to start with a coach who I kind of know that could be completely different than what I saw with the recruiting process, right? And I've got this way different academic load where I've actually like got to study now and take tests. Oh, and I'm going to have to go to the weight room, right? Like that's a lot. And you can take one of those things right off your plate right there. It's like, okay, I'm familiar with the weight room. I feel good here, and I'm comfortable in this spot.
Right. It's not going to be a stressor, like a negative stressor on you, or you go in there. You're not going to feel anxious. It's just going to be like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So there's so many values in beginning that process at a young age, and we always I always talk about it like why you should start training early, like as you know, the whys, like how we kind of explain it in kind of the shape of a pyramid, right? Like if you want to be a great athlete, think of yourself, your performance and your athleticism in the shape of a pyramid, right? And then think of your favorite athlete. Like who's your favorite athlete?
Ilona Mar. She's a rugby player.
Okay, so and her pyramid is you're pretty high level anyway, like as an athlete, but your pyramid's probably about this big, and her pyramid's probably like three times.
Much bigger than mine.
Right? But if you want your pyramid to be as big as hers, like what's the first part you're going to start with? Probably the foundation, right? Like the bottom part. Like any budding architect will tell you, like the foundation part. And your foundation as an athlete, what makes you an athlete is strength, speed, agility, mobility, flexibility, nutrition, injury prevention, self-confidence. Like that's what makes you a great athlete, regardless of sport. You have high levels of any of that of that stuff right there. You're gonna be a good athlete because think about the best athletes in your high school right now, right? The best athletes, right? They're not just great at one sport.
Right, they normally play multiple sports, and you call them athletic, like that general term. You're like, oh, they're really athletic.
Right, and like almost any coach will take a athlete over somebody that is just a skill player, right? Because the athletic part becomes way easier, right? So like our philosophies, right? It's like build the foundation first. The bigger you make that foundation, the better you become at strength, speed, agility, mobility, flexibility, nutrition. The more your self-confidence is going to grow. And then it makes the skill component of your sport next, which is that next layer. Like now you can spend time there. Like our philosophy is 60% of your time work on your foundation. 30% of the time, go work on the skill of your sport, right? And then the last top is like, okay, then you're kind of looking at the mental side,
Yep.
right? That side of training. So if you can kind of follow that philosophy, it's like build the foundation first, because the rest of it's easier. I mean, as I always say, it's like, if you don't believe me, like think about how much easier preseason is when you're in shape,
Yeah.
right? Like the skill, you're not dog tired when your coach is having you work on skill work. When you're in shape, that skill component becomes way easier.
And exactly, and I think it becomes easier because you are not fatigued. And kids don't know this, but we know that like when you're fatigued, skill acquisition kind of goes out the window. So the more you're able to resist that fatigue, the more skill that you're going to acquire, and the less tired you're going to be throughout practice. Then you have other people who are just gassed, barely holding on, and they're like trying to make it
Right.
through preseason.
And they're also the ones most likely to get hurt.
Yep.
Right? With the stuff that's completely preventable, like the quad pulls and the calf pulls and stuff like that, it's like that stuff is completely preventable if you're in shape, right? And it's not just going out there and running a couple miles or stuff like that. Like it's all encompassing,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, that's kind of like our overarching message here is build that foundation first, that athletic pyramid first.
Well, awesome. Well, Stan, I think we're going to wrap it up here. That was a great chat. Why don't you go and let everyone know where they can find you, where this place is located, and if they're ever in the Saco area, where they should train.
So Skofield Sports Performance, our website is exactly that, www.skofieldperformance.com. We are on Instagram, Skofield_sports. Facebook, Skofield Performance, and then we are on TikTok.
I'm about to say, don't forget TikTok.
We need to pick up our TikTok game. It's not at the level of the Gazer. Definitely not there. But we're there as well. But that's where you can find us. Happy to help in any way I can. So thank you for having me on. It's a lot of fun. Good catching up with you.
Great. Yeah. I'll list all that stuff down in the show notes. That way, if you're interested and want to learn more, you can click on that. But Stan, thanks for doing this, man. It was great.
Thank you.